Hello everybody, welcome back. This is part 2 of class 1. This is the penetration testing class, and in part 2 I will go over details around the need of pen testing with a threat and impact model. It's very key to understand that. Then I will go over like what should be tested while performing a pen test. After that I'll go over the qualities that make a good penetration test and I'll go over those qualities in detail. Alright, so let's begin. So now you have a good idea about some of the needs for penetration testing, right? So next I want you to look at how to treat an agent from an impact standpoint when it comes to a business. All right. So basically we have something called a threat agent and how it can impact your business. That's what you need to understand. So at this first level, we have different threat agents that could potentially launch an attack in an example. And the various threat agents are like your corporation, cyber criminals, other employees, your hacktivist groups. It could be a nation, state, or finally like terrorists. There could be different threat agents which can launch an attack on an organization, on an individual, on a nation. So you should be aware of those threat agents also. All right. So let's say in this case, which I've depicted in the diagram, let's say our threat agent is triggered by a cyber criminal, which is very common these days. We know like all threat agents will target a business asset. Usually there's a goal, there's a driving factor behind all these threat agents that, okay, I want to get, A, like, could be some business secret. B could be like, your credit card information or some personal sensitive information, right? So given this relationship, threat agents do not directly, or I would say very rarely they do that, do not directly access the targeted assets. They don't just go in and just do a brute force on it, right? Because they'll get detected. So what they do is they must interact or circumvent other elements of the system to obtain their objectives against the assets. So therefore, controls are not directly assigned to assets. Instead, all the controls must be provided through a security function, right? So I want you to understand this a little bit, closely, because usually we have threat agents, your cyber criminals, right? And given the relationship they have, they don't usually go in and just start attacking your assets. So their interaction, they usually like circumvent a backdoor or through some other methodology, they try to gain access. So our goal is that the controls, which basically govern your security policies and functions, should not be directly aligned, right, with your security. What I mean is like your controls should be different than for gaining access or giving access to different parts, right? All right, let me make you a little bit more familiar with this concept, right? So usually instead you giving controls, you must provide a security function, and that's what I kind of described to you earlier also. So this security function is directly aligned to the identified threats, the attacker vectors and the vulnerabilities that provide different access to the components that contain the assets. So there is a layer down there. So this is a fundamental principle basically. Controls must be selected and implemented to address threats, attacks, or attack vectors by performing one or more functions. So let's go over these functions. So first one is when threat intelligence is included in this model, the architects, engineers, analysts can work in a cohesive manner to identify potential gaps and access degrees of efficiency. What this does is thereby continues to enhance the security. It basically gives you different postures of systems and infrastructure, right? So when threat modeling and analysis is introduced in this model, the potential areas of exposure and impact are basically highlighted, and because of they are highlighted, this basically enriches the selection and implementation of controls. So this is a very key thing to remember and to follow. Another thing is that the security weaknesses are exploited by threat agents. So all these threat agents, like your cyber criminals, so they basically exploit the security weaknesses. And with this, they can gain access to the security controls or areas in the organization that are restricted to outsiders, right? Because they can also go for your security vulnerabilities and weaknesses. Then they have, once they have gone through that channel, now they have access to your technical assets. They have access to your functions, then which are compromised, and basically these are the functions which then lead to your negativity in your business and also impact your business and your organization. So the security weakness exploit, your organization could suffer losses due to this also. So now you understand, how this works. So next thing I want you to understand, or I want you to know, that is what should be tested. What should be tested when you are part of a pen testing team, on a penetration testing team? What would you test, right? Organizations should conduct a risk assessment operation before doing penetration testing. So a risk assessment operation will help to identify the main threats faced by an organization. So this is very key. And some of the common ones are communication failure, could be like e-commerce failure and loss of confidential information. So these are some of the common like threats which are faced by an organization, right? It could be communication failure, it could be e-commerce failure, like transactions or something, it could be loss of some very critical confidential information. So the public-facing systems like your website, email gateways, and remote access platforms, right? That's one thing. And another key is your public-facing problem which you get, or where public faces issues, and your public-facing sites which face issues and problems because the system got compromised. So this typically happens when your application or your website which you're dealing with, and basically when it deals with your user records, or your website goes down, or you have been a victim of the denial of service attack, which is also called the DOS attack. So these are your public facing systems and websites, how critical they are and how they can go down. So usually organizations should always make sure that email communication channels like SMTP or your SMTP server are also part of your risk assessment operation. It's very critical. Don't leave anything for somebody else to figure it out. You have to make sure that your public-facing channels are always part of your risk assessment operation. Now, the remote access platform, that is the next one, right? The remote access platform, where you give basically access to your internal networks, are also a huge risk if not dealt with and if not secured properly. So finally, some of the other threat identifiers are your, as I said, mail could be one, your DNS servers, your firewalls, your password list, password protection, your FTP on your IIS server or Linux servers, if you have opened those ports up, and of course your web servers, which give access to your sensitive information, right? So another key thing to follow is that testing should be performed on all hardware and software components of the network security system. It's not just the hardware or not just software. It has to be cohesively both of the systems for your security networks. All right, so every organization out there just wants to secure their system. That is everybody's goal, right? So that's why we want to run penetration tests on those systems to make sure they're secure. So our primary objective is to secure an organization by using your penetration testing process and different techniques. In case you're just thinking that what is the primary objective for an organization while doing a pen test or a penetration test, I would say that the most clear and important objective is securing the organization from potentially external threats by proper implementation. Remember it, by proper implementation of your security policies, and that is a must. So always remember that, all right? Okay, so next is what makes a good penetration test. So the following activities I've listed out here in this slide are some of the key things which make a good penetration test. First and foremost is basically establishing the parameters for penetration tests, such as your objectives and also the justification of procedures. So that is the first thing. Next activity is hiring of skilled and experienced professionals to perform your test. That is super critical. So, and this is one of the main reasons I want all of you to pay special attention to this training, because it is very important. Like, what kind of experience do you need to get? And the goal is not to only learn what I'm teaching, but also to gain some experience by practicing in the labs, which will follow. And also doing a lot of reading, I would suggest, because this is a very evolving field, and you would need a lot of extra reading. So that's why I want you to pay special attention to these topics. All right. So next the next important aspect is to carefully choose a suitable set of tests that basically is a balance between cost and benefits for an organization. So once you have identified, or once you have all these different gaps identified, and you know the threats, so the key is to follow the methodology with proper planning. And of course, a detailed documentation is needed for that. So documents basically are the results of basically why documents, because they result carefully in documenting or organizing and making a comprehensive assessment for your client also. So documentation is very key. So it is also important to know that a penetration tester who is part of the team who's performing the pen test for an organization must be available all the times to answer any queries, questions which the organization has after the pen testing is done, and or before also when the documentation is getting done, because documentation starts from day one. All right. So basically the starting, or you can say the potential risks which are found and the findings for the final report. That is what is the last thing which you need is well, as pen testers are making the final report, just think about it as clients will only get to know about the vulnerabilities only after you file the report. That's right. So you make them aware of it. You as a pen tester should make them aware of it, what you have done. And that is your goal, your duty, right? Your work really will be represented by the report you submit, and after the report comes after you've done your pen testing. So the documentation part, which I was talking about, is really, really important. I cannot stress enough on this, guys. You have to make sure the documentation part is really, really, really important, and what you have done is really important. How many numbers of hours you have spent is really important as a penetration tester. How many minutes you have spent on each process. As much detail, as much minute detail you can give, in your report. And finally, the report will tell to the client that they need to know, and what they need to know, and how they need to react and act to the whole situation. All right. All right, so this brings us basically to the end of part 2 of class 1. I went over details around the need of penetration testing with the threat and impact model. I would suggest that you go and look at the model on the side by yourself and try to make some sense out of it yourself. Rethink it in different standpoints from different cyber threats, okay? Next, I also taught you what you should do and what should be tested while performing a pen test. And lastly, I got you familiar with the qualities that make a good penetration test. All right, I'll see you in part 3 of class 1. Thanks for joining.